On True East, we often focus on tanks, drones, and strategic shifts in the Middle East. But today, we're turning to another front in this war. One that doesn't play out with missiles or ground forces, but with headlines, hashtags, and the fight for moral clarity. Before we begin today's show, one quick note on a personal note. For 21 years, I spent my time in the city of David inside biblical Jerusalem, excavating and unearthing the actual archaeology that proves the Jewish connection to Israel going back more than 3,000 years. As you can imagine, while there was a shockwave that went out to the world that was delighted about this, there was another shockwave that went out to the United Nations, to pro-Palestinian groups, to those who are denying Jewish history in Israel and framing the Jewish people as colonizers in our own land. I have now written a book called When the Stones Speak, which is coming out on May 13th. This book describes my eyewitness accounts over more than 20 years of how a courageous group of people insisted and continued on unearthing the most incredible discoveries that reinforce Jewish history in the state of Israel while standing strong against attacks that involved the Muslim Brotherhood, the State Department, even at one point a White House. So I would like to invite you to buy a copy today. You can pre-order it on Amazon or on Barnes & Noble. It will be available at bookstores near you. When the Stones Speak, we're going to include a link in the show notes. Thank you. Since October 7th, Israel has been under military assault, but so have Jews across the world. The war has spilled over beyond the battlefield into synagogues, classrooms, newsrooms, and especially into college campuses. Jewish students are afraid to speak up, afraid to wear a Magen David, a Star of David, afraid to walk to class. And just last week, Israel's National Security Council issued a chilling global warning. Jews abroad should hide signs of their identity. We are watching the collapse of moral courage inside the institutions we once trusted most: elite universities, media, the international human rights community. And now, it's reached a boiling point. The standoff between the Trump administration and Harvard has exploded, expanding now to over 150 US colleges and universities. At the heart of the dispute, the administration's freeze on federal funding in response to what it sees as a catastrophic failure to confront anti-Semitism and an outright refusal to stop pro-Hamas riots erupting on American campuses and universities. Universities are now publicly denouncing the government, framing this as political overreach. But for the Jewish community, the question is far deeper. What does it mean when the very institutions Jews once relied on as a path to success, integration, and upward mobility become hotbeds of hate? What does it mean when education, long viewed as the gateway to a better future, is now a battlefield? And amidst all of this, a few voices have emerged with clarity and courage. One of those voices, perhaps the most well-known voice, is Eylon Levy, a former international spokesperson for the Israeli government and one of the most visible defenders of Israel since October 7th. He has conducted thousands of interviews on international media, dismantling falsehoods and standing up for Israel with sharp, unapologetic clarity. He joins me today to talk about the battle we're fighting, not just the battle on the ground, but in the realm of ideas, identity, and truth. Thank you, Eylon, for joining us.
Major Spielman, good to be here.
Good to see you again. We've switched seats.
Switch seats, exactly. Now you get to sit in the anchor's seat and ask me the tough questions.
I'm excited. So
I don't have a book to promote, unfortunately.
Well, let me pull out, that's true. Let me pull out my bullet sheet here. Eylon, you've traveled the globe more than anybody. I'd say you and Douglas Murray received the Flight Wing candidate for traveling the globe more than any two people defending.
You want to guess how many times I've circumnavigated the globe since the beginning of last year?
Do you have the answer to that question?
I have the answer. 8.
You've flown around the world 8 times.
8 times since the beginning of the war, yeah.
I think you could have made it to Mars by then.
Quite possibly, yes.
You could be the first Israeli spokesperson on Mars.
That's the other Eylon.
The other. Nice.
I like to say the only Eylon on Twitter with more followers than me, but he owns the platform.
That's true. Eylon, I want to ask you, with everything you've seen traveling around the world, since October 7th, we know we're at war. There's a battle. There's a narrative war. Where is the front today? And has that changed since October 7th?
Well, the front line remains the physical battlefield. We still have men on the ground in the field, Gaza, Lebanon, Syria. We still have missiles coming from Yemen and a potential strike on Iran against its nuclear facilities this year. So the physical battlefield remains the most immediate battlefield. But there is another domain, and that domain is the information war. Now, in some ways, Hamas has deliberately rigged the battlefield, Lebanon as well to some extent, in order to win the information war. Hamas knows that when it builds its military facilities into schools, homes, mosques, hospitals, it tries to secure permanent immunity for itself. It tells Israel, you can't touch our facilities because if you do, you're going to get condemned. And when you get condemned, that's going to spark protests around the world and Israel will be delegitimized. That's the long game here. The long game is not to try to bleed Israel out on the battlefield, but to bleed it in public opinion. They want to bring the world, the enlightened world, to a place where they think that the Jews are worse than Nazi Germany. Worse than Nazi Germany because the Nazis couldn't have known any better, but the Jews really should. It is an attempt to destroy Israel by convincing people in the West that Israel deserves to be destroyed. And so the information battlefield is interlocked with the physical battlefield. They go hand in hand. Not only does the information battlefield affect how we're doing on the physical battlefield, literally whether we have enough ammunition for our men on the ground. That's why it's important to maintain diplomatic support. But the battlefield affects the information battlefield as well, the two of them, because of the long-term implications for Israel's international standing. It comes down to the question, are we going to emerge from this war as an international pariah, a Pyrrhic victory where we've won but there are smoldering ruins about us? Or do we end this war in a place where we have earned the respect and admiration of people who look at Israel and say, out of their darkest hour came their greatest. They stood up for themselves, and we can learn lessons from them too.
You know, you speak about Hamas like this is a really carefully planned assault on Israel. Do you think this was scripted before they invaded on October 7th?
I think Hamas knew exactly what it was doing. Hamas rigged Gaza's urban battlefield. It rigged Gaza's urban cityscape for war. With the 400 tunnels of miles, longer than the New York subway, underneath homes, schools, hospitals, mosques, they knew exactly what they were doing. They knew, and by the way, their own people have admitted to it in interrogations in the past, that Hamas hides in hospitals because it thinks that they're safe, because it knows that it's not going to be attacked, because it puts Israel in this impossible position where it bombs and people get killed and then it gets condemned, or it doesn't bomb and Hamas gets immunity, or it urges people to leave for their own safety, which is what a responsible, law-abiding military should do, and then Israel gets condemned for forcibly displacing people. So I think that the physical battlefield was deliberately rigged and structured in order to win the information battlefield. That's why Hamas fights out of civilian clothes, out of civilian buildings, because it's about the optics. Hamas knows how the media battle works. Unfortunately, it knows our biggest weakness. There are many people around the world who are not only willing to believe the worst about the Jews and Israel, they want to believe the worst. And Hamas serves them that excuse on a silver platter.
So I want to talk exactly about that, because if Hamas is planning and creating a set where they're going to really frame Israel as being this enemy, it has to reverberate with those specific people that are just waiting for an opportunity. Do you think that they really focused on those centers? I mean, were they surprised by what happened in universities? Because that's beyond optics. I mean, I was surprised at the outflow of support for them. Do you think they understood that they had such a population there that would reverberate with the messaging?
I think they did understand that, because so much of the debate that is happening about Israel is not really about Israel. It's a form of projection. As our friend Douglas Murray writes in his new book on democracy and death cults, people are blaming Israel for what they've been told that their own societies are guilty of. They've been told they're guilty of colonialism, dispossession, imperialism. So they project it onto Israel as a scapegoat. The Palestinian cause has become totemic of the international anti-colonial, anti-Western struggle, which is insane because there is nothing more neo-imperialist than the attempt to resurrect an Islamic empire on the liberated land of Israel, right? Hamas's project is an imperial colonial vision.
Comes from the Muslim Brotherhood. That is the whole caliphate throughout the Middle East.
Exactly, to establish a Muslim caliphate, a Muslim empire on the territory of a democratic country populated by the indigenous people of this land. Put that to one side. Do you remember of course you remember, it wasn't that long ago, the hostage release ceremonies? including the dead baby parades that Hamas put on for the Bibas children when they're all standing in their military regalia and outfits. What was the intended audience? There are several intended audiences. It's possible they were trying to send a message to Israelis to strike terror and fear in their hearts by showing how powerful they were. It's possible they were trying to reach international policymakers. I know from discussions with diplomats, they were shocked to see how well organized those parades were. They said, we thought Hamas had been defeated. We believed you, okay? A show of force. I think they were also appealing to the useful idiots on Western campuses because there is such a thing as jihad chic now. The keffiyeh has become a fashion statement. I saw it even walking around Toronto. People wear it like scarves. It's become a fashion statement. It has become iconic. You saw the outpouring of jubilation and exhilaration for Yahya Sinwar when he was killed on social media. People taking the video of him waving that stick at the Israeli drone as if it was some amazing, glorious act of resistance. There is a revolutionary chic behind Hamas. And I think that when they put on these images, they know exactly the audience that they are playing in for in the West. The people who think that these, the Islamist, jihadi, misogynistic, patriarchal, homophobic, etc., who think that these awful, awful monsters share a common cause with those who claim to be on the front lines of humanity.
That's
and on the front lines of progress.
You're telling me that the campus students that are wearing those scarves and are wearing the keffiyehs, when they saw Hamas parading the babies around, they actually felt strength?
I think so.
Wow.
It's a chic.
Wow.
It's a look. It's like the Nazis and the fascists. They had their own aesthetic. There is a Hamas aesthetic. And they know, when they look at the ways that the students are protesting with the keffiyehs and everything, that they're trying to interconnect the visual language there. So I don't think you can disconnect how the radical protests in the West are giving strength to Hamas because they look and say, we have the sympathy and admiration of elite institutions. And the other way around, how Hamas's acts of violence and barbarism that were celebrated immediately after October 7th give courage to people on university campuses because they see this as, liberation in action. It's revolting, it's twisted, and we can talk a little bit about what the administration is doing now to combat this. Whatever the answer, it is a movement that should deeply, deeply disturb people. It is symbolic, it is symptomatic of a deep sickness in Western culture, a form of self-loathing, an inability to regulate and mediate the difficult conversations these countries need to have about themselves without reaching into some imaginary, mythical past and cosplaying resistance when these countries don't understand how good they've got it.
So if you can't deal with things on the inside, basically blame Israel and blame the Jews. Meaning it's an easy outlet as opposed to soul-searching.
One of my favorite books is Anti-Judaism by David Nirenberg. He looks at the history of the portrayal of Jews. He says, we have a tendency to think of the Holocaust as a fluke. The Nazis went mad. They managed in 10 years to convince the Germans that the Jews were cockroaches and the Jews should be killed. But that form of projection, seeing the Jews as whatever we are not, has been a staple of Western intellectual history. When they were capitalists, the Jews were communists. When they were communists, the Jews were capitalists. If they were religious, the Jews were heathens. If they were atheists, the Jews were religious fanatics. If they're pacifists, we're militarists. If they're militarists, we're pacifists. You can never win it. So Western societies have always held up a mirror and said the Jews are whatever we are not, whatever we're defining ourselves in contradistinction to. He brings an amazing example.
It goes back to the roots of, uncomfortably goes back to the roots of some of Christianity, where there was a reaction to Jesus. The whole myth, which is now rejected by the Catholic Church, that Jews killed the God of the Christians, right? Killed Jesus, established immediately an antithesis.
By the way, I think we even hear this in the language coming from the Irish government, for example, when very early into the war, they said, I think that this is not self-defense anymore. It approximates vengeance. And you can just hear the echoes of, we are the kindly, charitable, compassionate Christians, not like those vengeful Old Testament Hebrews. But what I mean is, part of the challenge for us in telling our stories is that we slot so easily into stories that people are already telling about us. The Jews are already characters in the Western imagination. So forget the fact that we can't agree between ourselves what our story is and what we want and what our narrative is. There are people for whom it is very easy to tell stories about the Jews and project onto them. You see it in Ireland, for example, where old school Catholic anti-Semitism has merged with resistance to Britain so that they frame the Irish struggle against the British as the Palestinian struggle against Israel. You see it in Australia where left-wing activists are trying to make the linkage between indigenous people and the Palestinians, and you see it in Britain with the anti-imperial language. They see that it's much easier to graft their own neuroses and psychodramas onto us than to deal with them for what they are. You know, if you seriously believe that the founding sin of the Western world is colonialism and imperialism, and that white settler colonial states are the worst thing in history. And by the way, we should be honest, the formation of these countries was brutal on what they did to the indigenous people. But if you think that's the original sin, are you going to dissolve Canada? Are you going to dissolve Australia? Do you tell all the white people in Australia to go back home to England and create some Aboriginal republic? Or is it much easier to say, we'll start with the dissolution of the state of Israel? And that's how we essentially not exculpate. What's the word? We sort of offload we offload our guilt onto them. Our blood be upon them, if we're to quote the Gospels, paraphrase the Gospels.
Eylon, the front line in this is a campus. I mean, how many campuses have you visited on your travels?
Wow, I've had campus experiences. They have not been pleasant. Look, I went to Oxford. Previous time I went to Oxford, I didn't need 8 bodyguards.
Wow.
I went back to Oxford a few months ago.
I mean, they were actually afraid of something physically happening to you.
We had students who blockaded the entrance of Brasenose College, wearing kaffirs and chanting from Oxford to Gaza, long live the Intifada. So I'm not going to have personal protection when there are people outside who are literally calling for suicide bombings in Oxford. Let me tell you what happened in Calgary.
And you're the face of Israel, so I would assume they'll take it out on you.
Do you know what happened in Calgary? Do you know Allahu Akbar is a traditional Canadian friendly welcome? University of Calgary, apologies to Canadians, middle of nowhere in Canada. The Muslim students on campus had realized that I was visiting. I was on a speaking tour with Stand With Us, and put out a poster with, Halloween dripping font calling me a terrorist, which I thought, great, that means they like me, right? No, apparently not. Protesting this genocidal baby killer. They found out where I was speaking on campus and were banging on the doors, chanting, Takbir Allahu Akbar, Takbir Allahu Akbar, genocidal baby killer. Eventually, the security said, you have to leave now. And I had to walk in the middle of a sentence out of the lecture hall, accompanied by my private security guard. In the professional jargon, they say a refrigerator. Hide behind the bins while they brought the car around the back entrance so I could be whisked off to the University of Calgary. That should disturb not only every Israeli, not only every Jew, it should disturb every Canadian. At the point that the police, at the point that security say, we cannot defend you, we cannot protect you as you exercise your legitimate rights of speech, you should flee. You should escape. It's deeply, deeply disturbing. And I don't know when this episode is coming out, but one can only hope that whoever wins the Canadian election is going to be the party that plans to do something about this.
Absolutely. I mean, what a defeat. I mean, I'm sure those Muslim students, after that happened, called all their comrades at the other campuses and said, we won.
Oh yeah, they put all the videos all over their Instagram because, as far as they're concerned, they chased a Zionist rat off campus.
Let me add, when you go to these campuses, and there are Jewish students at these campuses, and some of them, I don't know, Calgary probably has a handful, but other campuses haven't. When they see you coming, the face of Israel, somebody who stood up on the news and has stood up for Israel, and they're in the front line with this new chic jihadism, what do they want from you? What are they getting from you coming there?
Jewish students in the West face a horrible dilemma. Look, when I went to Oxford, when I was a student, it was said that you could have 2 of 3 things, okay? You could have a boyfriend or a girlfriend, you could get a first-class degree, or you could excel at a sport or an activity. You can't have all 3, okay? If you want to have a romantic life and to do well at your degree, there's no time for social activities. You have to pick 2 of the 3. They told me now it's changed. You can be pro-Israel or you can have friends.
Wow.
people who are pro-Israel are just being excluded, excommunicated, ostracized from society. When I was at Oxford, we defeated a BDS motion by a margin of 6-1 at the student union. Impossible to imagine now, where every college common room has adopted motions against Israel. And the risk is this then informs the next generation of policymakers. Students who are on campus today could well be in a classroom with the next prime minister of their country. Many of them will be in a classroom with a future member of parliament. Very many of them will be in a classroom with a future policy advisor. Everyone's in a classroom with a future journalist or future social media influencer or current social media influencer, because social media has completely democratized information and influence. And that deeply disturbs me, because on the one hand, I don't see a path for these institutions to reform themselves from within and for there to be a natural correction. On the other hand, any backlash against that movement is liable to ricochet against us as well. Some people
meaning Jewish students. When you say against us,
Jewish
it's the
students,
Jewish students. Yeah.
Because some people may look at what the Trump administration is doing, cracking down on Harvard and the universities and saying that's amazing.
And 150 other universities.
Someone is taking seriously the anti-Hamas riots and the anti-Semitism on campus. But many people will look at it and say, no, it's just an excuse and it's a fig leaf for an administration that is trying to seize control of all other centers of power in the country, to crack down on dissent and to use the Jews as an excuse. And therefore, anyone who associates with that out of the good faith desire to crack down on anti-Semitism and anti-Hamas protests is lending a hand to this whole other agenda that doesn't actually have anything to do with us. Look, if you say that on the left, so much of what is happening about Israel is projection, okay? And bundled together. Being anti-Israel is part of what it means to be on the modern left, together with being anti-West, pro-trans, environmental, whatever. It's a bundle of things that come together. By the way, when I helped to defeat the BDS motion at Oxford, I appealed to the student who was leading it. We were at high school together. I said, why are you doing this? You don't care about Israel. And she said, well, I'm just on the left. It's what we do.
Wow.
It's just part of the bundle, okay? So one way that you fight back against this is that being pro-Israel is just part of the bundle of being the backlash. Part of the bundle of the anti-woke backlash is that they hate Israel, therefore you're pro-Israel. But what if that doesn't work out for us, right? Because look at what's happening on the American right, among the woke right, for example, the Tucker Carlsons and the Joe Rogans. What happens when that big anti-Israel camp on the American right, if that becomes ascendant, and then you're stuck between a rock and a hard place?
So if you have a cousin, a son, a daughter that's studying in the United States or in Britain, I mean, is there still a value? I mean, is it worth it to still study at an elite institution?
That's a difficult question. It's a difficult question because...
You send your kid into battle. I mean, if, by doing it by default, if you want to be a Jew, and the other side is saying if to be on the left is to hate Israel, which is default, unfortunately, attacking Jews on campus, which are associated with Israel. If you're sending your kid to Columbia, well, I'll tell you a story. There's a very prestigious Jewish academy in Manhattan, whose name I won't mention right now, that always sends students to Columbia. This year, I was told by one of the parents, not a single kid that was graduating applied to Columbia this year. They're not even sending their kids to the Ivy League school that is 3 minutes from the front door that they funded. Many of them are funded divisions by parents of people in that school. Look, so what's the answer here for elite education in America?
When I meet Jewish students, I try to G them up and instill in them some fighting spirit to stand up for themselves. My slogan is, I tell them, you are not Gen Z, you are Gen Zionist. Being a Zionist means standing up to bullies. You don't let them bully you, shout you down. You don't let them call you names or push you around. You stand up for yourselves. You stand up for each other, for your Jewish brothers and sisters when they are in need. You earn respect for yourself. Now that's difficult. It's difficult to stand up to bullies because you pay a price for it. My message to Jewish students is, you want to go to an elite institution in the West? Do it. But you have a mission. You do not have the luxury of having an ordinary college education where you can study, get drunk, and do whatever it is students do. Because you know what? 18-year-old Israelis don't have the luxury of just having a normal existence. They have a mission too to go out and defend the country, at least the portion of the population that enlists in the army. If you are a student on campus, you need to know that part of your campus experience needs to be activism. It needs to be standing up for the Jewish community and for Israel.
Going on the offensive.
Going on the offensive. But you have to accept that you're going into a battlefield, and as part of studying, you will have to dedicate time to this fight because it matters. And the fight for Israel, not just, we're against anti-Semitism, but not when it comes to Israel. Here's why it's connected. The biggest driver of anti-Semitism now is the lies and propaganda that are being spread about Israel. And they're giving Jews an option of conditional acceptance. You can be Jewish, you can have your challah, you can have your Shabbos candles, that's all cool. You can even come and do a Seder inside the pro-Hamas encampment, the Tentifada. But as long as it has nothing to do with Israel. You want to be Jewish? Fine. As long as you turn your back
so
on
we
half
left
of the
Egypt
Jewish
to
world,
come to America, not to Israel.
and let your brothers and sisters in Israel burn. That conditional acceptance is extremely dangerous. And if you don't stand up to the propaganda against Israel, and if you don't stand up for Israel, then you allow the enemy to condition your acceptance within American, British society, wherever it is. And that is extremely dangerous for Jewish life. No country that has ever conditioned Jewish acceptance in that way has ever thrived and succeeded. And that's why these people are standing up not only for themselves, they're standing up for the well-being of their countries too.
So is there a division within the Jewish community on campus? I mean, do you have kids who are actually agreeing to do this conditional acceptance?
Look, the Jews on campus split into the 5 sons of the Seder table. Okay?
The 5 sons.
The 5 sons.
Who's the 5th son? Well, who are all the 5 sons?
There's the wise son. There's the wise son. The wise son asks difficult questions about the facts, knows that he is part of this greater Jewish collective and wants to stand up for Israel and the Jews. There is the wicked son. The wicked son is not out of the tent, but they try to take a position where we're in favor of everyone. We're pro-Israel, pro-Palestinian. They try not to get into the fight. They try to think that if they sit on the margins and don't get involved and are occasionally critical, that people will leave them alone. There's the son who, the simple son, many students who want nothing to do with this. There is the son who doesn't know how to ask, who is sort of sympathetic but is afraid of getting into a fight. And then there's the other son. And the other son isn't actually at the Seder table because he's outside protesting against his family, accusing them of putting Christian blood in the matzah. Okay? That's what we're seeing on campuses now. You have the students who are strongly, stridently pro-Israel, and they are going on the offensive, and they are fighting against the BDS motions, and they're really putting themselves on the line. You have the students who are trying to keep their heads down. The vast majority of them, they're not built for a fight. And then you have the students who have either internalized the criticism, really buy into it, or it's a survival mechanism, who think that by being against Israel, by wearing a watermelon yarmulke, they can buy their acceptance. But that's exactly what is so dangerous about this. They're never going to be radical enough for the radicals. They're never going to be radical unless they totally renounce all their Jewish identity entirely. They're playing with fire.
Is anyone, I'm hearing this and it's incredible that the comparison between, I never thought about this, an 18-year-old IDF soldier and the commitment, if you're going to go to campus and have a strong Jewish identity, that you basically have to know that you're going into the narrative war and prepare yourself.
The soundbite that I tell students on campus, if your cousins in Israel can lose friends who fell in battle, you can lose friends over a falling out over politics. And if your cousins in Israel can stand up to Hamas on the battlefield, you can stand up to the Hamas fangirls on campus. They have a mission to defend their people. They don't have the luxury of just having an ordinary student life. And you too have to accept that this is a pivotal moment in history right now. This is a pivotal moment in history. This is the formative moment when people's minds are made up on campuses thanks to the tectonic changes of geopolitics. What I tell them is, you might feel powerless because there is so much hate and so much disinformation, you don't know where to start. But you are the strongest voice who can convince someone your age on your campus. No one else is going to reach them. No one is coming to convince your friend who's consuming TikTok. It's literally on you. And that means that you individually can make a difference. And that should make you feel powerful because you can genuinely make a difference. And I hope that message empowers Jewish students to stand up for themselves.
It's an incredible message, Eylon. I mean, it strikes me as being a lot to ask, but you're turning their weakness into strength. And, you know, I'm often asked as well, what can I do on campus? And I think that's the answer. Pick up your head and charge forward. Have you seen leaders emerge from this on campus? Have you seen heroes emerge in that environment?
Wow, there are so many amazing Jewish student leaders who have been leading the charge. I can't name all of them. I mean, one trailblazer, my friend Adela Kochav, who, the Title VI Titan, she did the original lawsuit against NYU for anti-Semitism that opened the way for Trump's executive order that is now being used with the whole suite of Title VI cases against universities, sue them on anti-Semitism. She was the lawsuit that created the legal precedent for the lawsuits against the colleges now that are placing pressure on them. Incredible. Together with, I mean, I wrote the foreword recently for an anthology called Young Zionist Voices, edited by David Hazony. I'm too old to actually write a chapter in the book because I'm over 30. So I got to write the foreword as like the old fogies compensation.
The elder statesman.
The elder statesman, exactly. The elder statesman of the Gen Zionist generation, filled with, you know, some amazing campus leaders who have invested a lot of thought in how to tackle and how to combat these things.
For those students who don't want to stay there and don't want to spend their lives fighting, and, you know, after hearing this description, the harsh reality, I feel like I'm going to take 5 cups of wine, not just 4 cups of wine. Maybe we'll do that after the podcast. Do you think it's going to push more students to want to study in Israel, to make Aliyah to Israel, just to say, what do I need to spend my life fighting? I'll go to Israel where at least I'm accepted for being a Jew.
Look, it is a very dramatic decision to make, Aliyah. How many 18-year-olds are going to commit themselves to go to Israel to study there? I hope it happens and that Israeli universities with their English programs are able to accept them. One thing I would definitely advise every Jewish high schooler abroad to do a gap year in Israel. Commit to 1 year in which you're volunteering, doing an internship, some pre-university program, and see if you like it. Test the waters. But I think Israel has incredible potential to absorb basically refugees from Western academia. But they don't have to think about it that way, okay? This is the duality of the Israeli story. The Jews who came here at the beginning of the 20th century, refugees or pioneers? They're in some ways both. They're in some ways refugees from anti-Semitism on a continent that had become uninhabitable. But in other ways, we told an inspiring story. This is the return to Zion. This is the rebuilding of our homeland. No one really did it until they were pushed out, except for a very few idealistic people. But we've always had this duality. There's never really been serious aliyah other than populations where they were pushed out, because they never leave until it's too late.
And they built Israel.
Look
at the most recent aliyah of Russia. They built the whole high-tech industry.
Exactly. So I think that there is an incredible opportunity to say, we can leverage this moment to build Israeli academia using students from the West who want to come here and live freely, enjoy the Israeli climate, enjoy the Israeli culture, who don't want to have to deal with all this mashigas on campus. And by coming here, you can be like, you know, the German scientists who escaped in the 1930s. I'm not comparing now to the 1930s, but people who say this environment has become uninhabitable and I'm going to go and build something. And I think that thought as well, that you can be part of building institutions that are less than a century old and propelling them up the global league tables, that is also part of our state building project in Israel, which isn't over yet.
If we look 10 years forward, you know, we're doing a podcast right now, JNS, you're a leader in the Jewish world. Students who want to lead hopefully are listening to this and gathering strength in their parents and their grandparents. For just to speak frankly, for the Jews who are just going to try to fit in, not going to battle, not going to stand up, just going to kind of duck their heads, fade into the woodwork, not come to Israel. 10 years from now, do you see that community surviving? I mean, if you go through an entire college experience which is shaping and forming you, and you have to hide your Judaism, where do you see the diaspora in 10 years, 20 years? I know it's a big question, but this seems to be a formative moment. You said it yourself. This is like a line in the sand.
No, I don't think that Jewish communities that try to disassociate themselves from Israel have any future. Because what is the anchor of their Jewish identity? Jewish identity used to be all-encompassing as a people, and then in the 19th century we decided actually it's just a religion, and then people said, well, we're not all that into the religion thing anymore, so what's left? I mean, what's left now is Zionism, Jewish nationalism, essentially, the belief in global Jewish peoplehood. Once you scupper that, but you've also really scuppered religious observance, what are you left with? There is no continuity to bagel lox and matzo ball soup, right? Israel is the beating heart of Jewish culture. It's you can't get away from what Professor Yossi Schein calls in his book, The Israeli Century. English translation is my own. The Israelification of Jewish identity. What is Jewish music now when you go to any Jewish event? They're playing Israeli pop songs.
It's Israeli music. And it's not Hava Nagila.
No, it's not Hava Nagila anymore. It's Omar Adam. And when they serve Jewish food, it's falafel and shakshuka, and it's Israeli food now. So I don't see a way that you can disconnect from it. By the way, the irony is that those on the extreme left, those who claim that it's possible to have a Jewish identity that isn't connected to Israel, have made almost their entire Jewish identity about opposition to Israel. Their identities also revolve around this country, just in opposition to it. So is there a way to say, look, we don't want to have anything to do with Israel at the same time that religious observance itself is weakening? I don't see any serious prospect for them to have. Because what sort of pride do you have? What sort of sense of collective identity do you have if you decide to turn your back against half of the Jewish world out of fear, shame, loathing, revulsion? That's no way to live.
What are you going to tell your children when you're having Passover Seder and Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt into the desert, into the land of Israel?
Next year in a rebuilt Al-Aqsa.
Exactly. What are you going to say, right? You know, Eylon, as we wrap up here, this is actually an incredible vision that you've given me in this discussion, which, you know, before October 7th, Israelis were fighting in the streets over legal reform, and there was a big divide. And there was more and more.
Israelis are fighting in the streets now.
That's true, but I do believe that there's a difference, meaning having shared a battle on the battlefield, even those Israelis who are in the streets, and they are a minority, I'm not discounting them, the vast majority of the country has become at least unified to some degree around fighting our enemy. But one thing that I didn't think about until this conversation is that now, as a result of October 7th and that tragedy, Israelis are fighting and risking their lives, to quote what you've been saying, and American Jews now basically have to fight for their Judaism as well, something that pre-October 7th may not have happened. And do you think, this is my last question for you, the fact that they are now fighting for their Jewish identity or going to give up, and we're fighting for the state of Israel, are we closer now than we were before the war?
October 7th has definitely brought the Israeli and diaspora communities together. It's pushed some communities away. It's accelerated some trends of disassociation from Israel. But it's amazing what I see in the diaspora. And Israeli Jews don't understand the way that October 7th hit them in the gut. And how much, I mean, the Jewish federations of North America alone raised the entire GDP of a Pacific island nation in support for Israel in emergency funds.
Incredible.
After the beginning of the war. They really feel it in their kishkas. I've been to homes where you see hostage posters inside people's kitchens. Like, they really, really feel it in their guts. And they're fighting for their place in their own societies as well. What are Australian Jews debating ahead of the election? Canadian Jews. They've decided how they're voting based on attitudes to the Jewish community, by and large. At least those who are really involved.
And many American Jews in the last election.
Exactly, where we saw a swing towards the Republicans because of this issue. I think that October 7th has triggered in some ways a revival of Jewish identity. I call it the Great Diaspora Awakening. Question is how we sustain it. That's the challenge. How do you sustain that sense of solidarity beyond the initial shock of October 7th as the war becomes more controversial, as the goals of the war seem to be coming apart? How do you preserve that sense of togetherness? And it has to begin in Israel with preserving that sense of togetherness within the country. But Doron, the more that this country seems that like the wheels are falling off the place because we're back at each other's throats over everything from judicial reform and Haredi enlistment and this, the Yoamashit, the Attorney General, and about the Shin Bet, and and all these arguments inside Israel, the harder it is for the diaspora to associate with Israel, because it's not clear what path Israel is on and what it stands for and where it's going. And so if we really want to heal the relationship with the diaspora and build a strong sense of Jewish peoplehood, it has to start with a strong Israeli peoplehood as well. But good luck to whatever leader is able to bring us to a point of unity within the country.
I'm listening to you, Eylon, and with your unique understanding, I'm going to ask one more question. I'm going to sneak one in, because I think that you are a leader in this area. I don't know anyone who understands this better than you. What do you see as your path forward as this grappling is between us and the diaspora?
I see myself as a bridge between Israel and the diaspora. When I go on Israeli TV, I bring a perspective of how things look from the outside that aren't always obvious to Israeli viewers. And I'm able to communicate to international audiences the nuances within Israeli discourse that they're not seeing when they're reading everything in English. So I try to help to mediate the two realities for them and try to underscore the commonality that we have. And if it's up to me, I will continue to advocate for this country. Not in an official capacity now, through no choice of my own. You and I have been working together with the Israeli Citizen Spokesperson's Office, what we're calling Israel's citizen voice to the world, trying to underscore what we have in common and speak up for our country if our country won't speak up for itself. And I hope to continue with those efforts to promote understanding of Israel and its uniquely impossible predicament.
Eylon, I can say one of the things that certainly came out of this war is there's a household name both amongst Israelis and amongst Jews abroad, and that household name is Eylon Levy. That happened through almost no choice of your own, but you answering the call of duty. And I think I speak for many of the people listening and many of those who hopefully will get this podcast that we wish you luck, because your luck is really a key at bridging the diaspora in Israel. Thank you so much for joining us, Eylon.
Thank you, Major Spielman. Good to be here.